stay in the South. So Ninth Wonder talks about creating futuristic nostalgia. So in a recent interview on Drink Champs, the legendary producer Ninth Wonder talked about his unique approach in producing Smiff-Wesson's February 2025 release entitled Infinity. So let's play this little clip here, and then we will talk further.
I have the task of how do I keep their sound and keep their feeling, but make it futuristic. I call it futuristic nostalgia. That's what I call it. To keep that feeling, their brand, because Smiff-Wessun is a brand. It's not only a sound, it's a look, it's the Timbs, everything. So how do I keep that futuristic and modern at the same time, not lose the fans that they've had for years? Like, I think that people mess up when they do that. They just forget the old fans. You can't forget that's the foundation. You can't do that. So me living in North Carolina, I still live around the people I went to college with. I know what they like, and I know how to make what they need. So I sit in this position of I want to hear, or what a fan in me wants to hear. So that's how I can tackle that.
Question posed here, and shout out to Maja 7th, who's not here, but he posed the question, why don't more producers take this approach sonically when working with older artists? And I added, do they?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I don't know very many quote-unquote producers that work with older artists anymore. You know what I mean? The super producers now. Like, because Ninth is not really a super producer right now. You know what I mean? That's why he's working with older artists. Respectfully, Ninth, I respect you and your art, man.
I think Ninth could probably work with almost anybody at this point, though. I would give him that. I know where Mike is coming from with this question, because like we talk about all the time about like, oh, that's the updated kit. Mm-hmm. And, you know, like there's certain producers where when they produce records, it sounds like 1997 or 1995. Mm-hmm. And some producers that are from that era sound like themselves, but just like a modernized version of it. I would say Pete Rock has done generally a pretty good job of like updating his version as he's worked with like Common and Smoke DZA and stuff like that with his sound. But then you have like younger producers that are producing that sound as well, but they weren't necessarily, they're children from that era. So if you think like a Crisis, Knots was around back in those days. Knots, a lot of the Soul Council people, to be honest, you know, Soundtrack and stuff like that. You have the DJ Dahis, you have, there's a lot of Soundwave, you know, but they have they're not like traditionally 90s necessarily, but there are some people like Soundtrack and like Crisis that can make that 90s sound, but it sounds new and it sounds like fresh. And there's a lot of people out there doing that. But to answer the question, I don't know why more producers, the questions were, why don't more producers take this approach? I think it would be better to say, why don't older artists work with producers that can do that more often? And that's a very interesting question to know, like, is it just relationship based? You know, because Ninth has this relationship with Smiff-Wessun and all this, you know, Tech and Steel and all that. So, you know.
It's definitely relationship based, because you as an artist have to be able to trust that producer's ear. You know what I mean? And if you don't trust their ear, because a lot of it, they probably sit in the studio together too, you know what I mean, and play beats, as opposed to just sending beat packs. You know what I mean? So they probably in there cooking something up together. Ultimately, that's what it is, man. Like, do you really trust a producer's ear? Yeah. You know what I mean? Or are you going in looking for that?
Well, a lot of what happens to these artists is they don't want to advance their sound. So they're still searching for the sound that they created a long time ago.
Gospel. That like worked for them then.
Exactly. So they're not as open as a producer might be, or they might get with a producer and the producer's not making the exact same type of thing that they want because it doesn't sound like back then. So they ain't working with them. Yeah. Whereas somebody like Ninth Wonder can adapt. I mean, he's still doing it. He's still out here doing stuff. He can adapt and still fit the sound. Like he said, he in North Carolina, he lives around people that are fans of Smiff-Wessun, that are his age, obviously. So he's approached it as a fan. As a fan, if I'm listening to Smiff-Wessun right now, how do I want it to sound? Yeah. So he came into it from the outside looking in as a fan and created something. So I think that has a lot to do with it as well, because you can get with a producer who has no idea what type of music that you want to produce or make, and aren't that invested in even doing it. It's pretty much, here's a beat pack, listen to the beats, tell me what you want to do, and then we can go from there. They're not investing in actually curating and crafting a sound that still fits their old aesthetic to create a futuristic nostalgia, as he put it. So I think the artist and the producer have to be on the same track in order to create that.
Yeah, well, I think what you just stated is like the producer was an actual fan of the artist.
Correct.
You know what I mean? As opposed to, look, you came here to see me. You know what I mean? So
I'm the one selling all the records.
yeah.
I do think, though, like very specifically with the type of artists we are talking about, because I've ran into this issue too, because I historically have a particular sound that people generally know me for. And when I go left field on stuff, or if my sound has changed, which it kind of has in the last 6 or 7 years, I've incorporated a lot more live instrumentation, but also like I use synthesizers a lot more. And I've worked with people in the past that I know specifically want a very particular type of nostalgic sound for me. And even though I feel like I'm giving them an updated version that fits with where we're at right now, sometimes there's pushback on that. So sometimes I think it's the artist that they get kind of in their head, like, I want to bring this specialty thing back, not realizing that this is just the modern version of it, that it's, you know, like if the producer is still like evolving, because that's another thing too, because some people don't evolve, like some producers don't evolve, some artists don't evolve. And I think that's another piece to it. It's like there are a handful of producers out here who are making boom bap style beats influenced from the 90s, but they don't sound like they're from the 90s. And that's the stuff that I want to hear my favorite 90s rappers on. I don't want to hear Wu-Tang Clan sound on beats that sound like they were made in 2001 or 1997. I want to hear them on modern, updated versions from the producers that are from that ilk, that understand where it came from, but know how to make it slap in 2025.
Right.
So,
Yeah, no, I think Byron hit it right on the head when he picked up on the fact that Ninth said he was a fan of Smiff-Wessun. You know, you can't almost get a certain level of futuristic nostalgia if you're not a fan of what these people did initially. You know, I think that's why the Common and Pete Rock album, to me, is excellent. You know, that's probably one of my favorite projects of last year.
Hey, my mama came and told me about that project.
So, you know, if you're a fan of Pete Rock, you know, if you're a fan of Common, like, you know, because last other Common albums, and I'm a Common fan, but I, you know, not a lot of replayability there. And but this one, the Auditorium Volume 1, when I see the Volume 1, I'm hoping there's a Volume 2. I'm hoping it's something like what Hit Boy did with Nas. And I think that's also, you know, another example. You know, clearly, you know, the things I've heard Hit Boy do for other people, it's not exactly the same thing that he did with Nas. And I think it's because, hey, I'm a fan of Nas. I want to, you know, get that stigma. I don't know if that's really something they thought of, because there's that lazy argument about Nas not being able to pick beats, which I think.
Except it's been validated.
Yeah, it's definitely
because
been validated.
Nas actually confirmed it in an interview, and he said that he picked bad beats because he wanted people to pay attention to the rhymes.
Okay. All
I
right.
didn't think he had bad beats though.
No, he had a slew of
You should know better.
yeah, we know he had some bad beats. He's just a really good rapper.
Okay. Well, I'm just
But you
saying.
also advocate for No Limit a lot too, right?
I do. A time period. It was a time of my life. You know what I mean? So I put them in that time of my life. But this is my argument about Ludacris. They're stuck in that time in my life. So when I hear those records, it takes me back to that time in my life, as opposed to like when I hear it now, I'm like, man, this still slaps. No, that was the record that I listened to back then and I enjoyed it. That's why I feel Ludacris doesn't get the credit that he deserves sometimes, because
I agree.
It's just it's nostalgia at this point. It does those records didn't age well.